Hi everyone, welcome to my channel, Free Writing Resources. Today's video, we are going to be talking about describing people of color in fiction. And this is how you can avoid sounding racist or foolish if you want to add characters of color to your books, or if you are an author or a writer of color who never really encountered information on how to write people of your own race before and you're looking for more information. So here's what I'm going to be talking about in this video. We are going to discuss what people usually get wrong when talking about people of color, writing about people of color in fiction. We're also going to talk about why people usually get this wrong, and then we're going to talk about how you can get it right, and additional writing tips that will help you write characters of color. So before I go on to the next bit of the presentation, I just want to give a quick reason for why I'm talking about this. And while there is a lot of good information out there on the internet, some of it I will link to, not just in the description, but I will discuss in this video. I find that sometimes people have questions that they don't know the answers to, and they don't really know where to find that information all in one place. And another thing too is that sometimes what I'll be talking about takes training and practice. And I'm not only going to show you how to write characters of color without being cliched or offensive, I'm going to teach you how to train yourself out of writing a specific way that presumes that white is normal and that characters of color are just deviations from white characters who are, quote, normal. And as I mentioned, we will talk about that further on. So let's hit the next slide. So what people usually get wrong, and I kind of started off by saying this a few seconds ago, but my bullet points. So this is where it's like, okay, you sound low-key racist. Too many descriptions comparing people to food. I will explain this again in further detail so you understand it, but there is something about constantly comparing characters of color and people of color to food that does not happen when people are typically describing white characters. And I'm going to explain more about this later, but when this is done too much, it doesn't just become cliched, it comes off really offensive and lazy. Descriptions for white characters are also a lot of the times very detailed, but people don't put that same level of detail and attention into describing characters of color. A famous example of this in a book that I read somewhat recently is if you read It by Stephen King. Usually he's guilty of hashtag men writing women, but he's also guilty of hashtag white people writing black people. He will describe the white characters as having, pale skin, this feature, that feature, this feature, that feature, and then he'll talk about black as if black is just one monolithic word that can be used to describe all black people. And I will show you why that is not the case and why that is really offensive to do, because unless you are operating solely based off of stereotypes, the word black doesn't tell you anything about a character that you are describing. And a little caveat here, I went and searched for what the racists be saying out there about black characters, and they say, oh, well, if a guy is describing his friend, he's just going to say it's a black guy. And that is not the situations I'm talking about where you're trying to be accurate in dialogue. I'm talking about your prose, not your dialogue, when you dedicate that space and time to fleshing out your descriptive desires for white characters. However, you just describe black people as black because you do not think that black characters and other characters of color are worthy of that detail, that description, and that depth of characterization. I'm not talking about dialogue. So next, your descriptions may be outright racist and based off of racial stereotypes. So this one, I don't really have any examples off the top of my head, but I can almost guarantee you that if you search, you will find it. And I did not research because I try not to read a lot of material that I personally find to be racist or stereotypical. But I almost feel like if you go into The Sound and the Fury so I do have an example. If you go into The Sound and the Fury by William Faulkner, and granted, he is a racist man, so that's part of it. But basically, the descriptions of the black characters are straight up racist based off of racial stereotypes, whereas the white characters are not described based off of stereotypes. And again, I will explain this to you so you understand it fully. And then the fourth thing that people usually get wrong is they just don't bother with descriptions at all. They just say black, He was black. End of description. There was no feature notable about him except black. Just black. That was it. He was just the black. And an author, who doesn't do this at all and who does a wonderful job at describing characters of color with detail and depth, especially skin tones, etc., is actually Holly Black, who is a young adult and children's fantasy author. And she is also a white woman. So this is proof that, it doesn't matter what your background is, how you write characters of color is based on kind of your attention to the issue and also your skill level as a writer. So I have this picture of someone who I believe is Christina Hendricks, and if she is not, my bad. I want you to think about words to describe her as you see her here right now, and I'm going to try to guess what you picked. Okay, did you say carrots? Did you say clam chowder? Her skin's like clam chowder? Or did you say her skin is like a glass of milk? So unless you have problems with redheads, you probably didn't say any of these when you were thinking about describing Christina Hendricks' skin. You probably did not think to compare her to a glass of milk, although by my estimate, it's definitely the most common, very pale, consumptible liquid in my life. Maybe that's because I live in dairy country, and clam chowder is another notable, great, pale food. However, those didn't jump to mind when you were thinking about describing Christina Hendricks' skin. Now, I'm going to show you a model who I believe is Anak Dai, and if I'm incorrect, I will try and add it in. I literally said, write this down before you start recording, and I did not. So now let's think about describing her skin tone. And let me guess what you came up with. Did you say coffee? Did you say chocolate? Or did you say caramel? Probably not caramel, because this is just an example that I made here of common foods, but I bet you a lot of people who watch this video would have said coffee or chocolate, both of which are foods. So this is what I meant by there is an over-reliance on using food descriptors to talk about characters of color that people do not rely on to describe pale characters or white characters, because nobody thought to call Miss Hendricks a glass of milk, but everybody thought to call the Miss Thing over here chocolate. And that is because we tend to describe people of color using consumptible items, because there's a lot of structural racism that allows us to view darker people and non-white people as consumptible. We view their experiences as experiences to consume. And I'm not going to dive into an entire sociology lecture. You're a writer, so you got to be a reader. And I want you to go read up on that instead of making me do this whole lecture. I'm talking about just writing here, how to be a better writer. So at its lowest form, doing this is cliched. When you describe every single black character as the color of coffee, the color of chocolate, if you want to say this is the least form, like the lowest form of, quote, offensiveness, is you're cliched. It's overdone. So if you don't buy into this whole racism thing for whatever reason, that's on you. But I want to tell you right now that your writing is cliched, it's boring, and you're doing a disservice to the unfortunate people who have to read your repetitive descriptions of black people as coffee, mocha, caramel, chocolate. The mid-range is you're lazy, okay? When I don't know something, I go and research it, because a part of being a writer is researching. That's why when you see people who have literature degrees or other degrees that are heavily focused on writing, one of the main things that they're taught is research skills, because a part of being a good writer is doing research. So if you're not just being cliched, you're being lazy and passive, and you want to fix that. And at worst, you're being racist because you just, whether it's an implicit bias that you're not aware of or an explicit bias that you are aware of, you don't think that certain characters deserve better descriptions. So you will not give those characters richer and better descriptions. And if you find yourself falling into any of these three categories, you know what? No worries, okay? I'm going to put it aside. I'm going to put my feelings aside. So I want you to put your feelings aside. Step out of your feelings, because I'm going to guide you through in this video how to do better, because I know that a lot of these resources out there are old. They're not in formats that people may be looking for in this day and age on writing, and I'm going to get you right, okay? I'm going to get you right. So let's talk about Christina Hendricks again. So usually in books, when you see someone who you might imagine like Christina Hendricks, let's say Miss Anne of Green Gables, for example, another famed redhead, you may see this level of description. She's got red hair. She's a girl next door. She's got scarlet hair, green eyes. These are just examples. Side swept bangs, Irish, Scottish, rosy cheeks, auburn hair, full lips, right? So you may see all of these descriptions. Now, those are just general descriptions, and you'll find that rich level of description when people are talking about white characters. Now let's get into the variety you usually see in vocabulary when people are talking about skin tone. And I just pulled these examples out of my head, so if they're not perfect and don't describe her skin, these are just examples. Alabaster, porcelain. By the way, neither of these are foods. If you eat porcelain, you crazy. Pale, fair skin, moonlight skin. I saw that one in my searches. Irish/Scottish. So referencing the ethnicity, which automatically makes people think of someone's appearance in a certain way. So soft beach sand. And all of these descriptions, okay, I'm going to go through it again. And all of these descriptions may be used interchangeably throughout a text. However, a lot of times, when you are talking about characters of color, you see something very different. So you may have a character that looks like Nicole Bahari, and I can think of, 7 different words to talk about her skin tone. We will get to that. But what you see in a book is black. Oh, we've got this actor who I think is named Ramona Young, and she was recently in a hit Netflix show, and she's just Asian. And I put almond eyes in quotes here because usually that is, if they don't say Chinese, they say almond eyes, and that's supposed to be your clue that she's Asian. Because, according to this racist way of writing, those are the only 2 things Asians can be. If you see an Indian person, it's usually just Indian. Occasionally, you'll see olive-skinned. I would not describe Mindy Kaling, by the way, who's a comedian, a writer, and an actress, as olive-skinned myself, personally. But that's the stereotype. And then if you see someone Latina, Hispanic. And that's supposed to cover all of Latin America and sometimes Spain as well, even if the term Hispanic actually refers to people from Spain, whereas Latina and Latino refer to people from Latin America, so South America, Central America, and the Caribbean, who are from countries that were colonized by the Spanish. But again, this is what you see. That's supposed to give you, those words are supposed to be coded to stereotypes. And because of that, you don't think to describe anymore because you've already put all your stereotypes into that one word. So why are people getting this wrong? Okay, we've talked about what's happening, what people are doing. Why is this happening? Why is this happening? Help me understand. So a part of it is complacency and habit. When you read a lot of books, like I do and like most writers do, you're going to see the same things over and over again. And a complacent way of kind of approaching the craft of writing is basically we read and we imitate via absorption, sort of self-consciously. And we get into bad habits from the authors that we've read. And when you're in a habit, unless you try to break that habit, you just remain doing the same thing over and over again. So you get complacent and you don't think to do something different. So the second is lazy diversity, lack of research. This is usually where an author says, oh, shitballs, I don't want someone to say that I'm racist. I had better put a character of color. I will put a Hispanic. She is spicy. Her name is Conchita. And they don't do any research. She's not Mexican. She's not Colombian. She's not Guatemalan. She's Hispanic. The next is they're afraid of getting it wrong. And this is where I have the most sympathy because I understand that a lot of writers are self-conscious about their writing in general. You may know you're supposed to put diversity in your books, but you also know that if you get it blatantly wrong and if you F it up, that you are going to be criticized. And receiving criticism can be very hurtful, even if that criticism is justified. And if you're afraid of getting it wrong, the solution isn't to avoid diversity. The solution is to educate yourself and do research. And if you're this far into the video, I'm going to assume that you're ready to do the research and you're ready to change. And then I think the last one is implicit bias. And this is what I mentioned a little bit before, where you aren't aware of your own discriminatory thoughts, feelings, and behaviors because we are not trained to kind of see our responsibility for our actions as easily as we see other people's responsibility for their actions. So you may be one of these people who recognizes when a man writes about a woman in a book in a totally sexist way, like describing a 12-year-old's nipples for some reason, but you may not see when you are just describing all your Black characters as being Black, even if the continent of Africa actually has the most diversity of physical features and skin tone than any continent on the planet. Look at. So how can you get this right? Okay, I'm going to school you today. I'm going to learn you a thing, as they used to say on Tumblr. I'm old. So how you can get this right. Okay, so practice. So I truly believe that writing is an iterative process, and the more you do it, the better you get. So you might make mistakes, and that you have to be okay with that, even if you get criticized, and you need to practice. So my tip for you is when you're coming up with your cast list, so John, Mary, Angelina, Black guy, jot down the descriptions that you can reference for all your characters. So I'm being a bit facetious by saying Black guy. Let's call him Ron. So you can say, okay, I'm writing about Ron, and I'm going to talk about his skin tone using these 3 adjectives, and come up with a list of descriptions and just write it on a little notepad. So I know it may sound lazy or like cheating, but that doesn't exist when you're just writing fiction out there in the world. So write it down on a little Post-it, and when you're like, okay, I'm talking about Ron right now. Oh, I said I would describe Ron as copper-toned, tawny skin, cinnamon. Then you can go and reference that and put that in. And I know I just listed a food, and I'm going to talk about that a little further in the video. So familiarize yourself with media created by people of color. Again, people of color can also get this wrong. Your skin tone doesn't make you immune from being ignorant, right? But a lot of times people of color, because we are often marginalized voices in fiction, we find ways to make fiction better. So let's say we notice that our people are constantly marginalized in the way their skin is described. We find a way to improve upon that in our body of fiction as a whole because of our feelings of being marginalized. And so a lot of times in media created by people of color, you will find this. Now, a lot of media created by people of color can still be colorist. It can still fall on these basic tropes. However, if you watch enough of it, you will be able to figure out that what people are doing that's different and new and avoids these racist cliches. So do more research. Again, research. And I'm going to, further in this presentation, you will basically see what that research can entail and how you can kind of hack this for yourself. I use Pinterest to do a lot of research. And this is kind of an example of doing research, which is studying the diversity amongst the ethnic groups you wish to write about. Typo. But so let's say, for example, I am writing about a girl from Sri Lanka. I have no idea how people from Sri Lanka look, but I'm not going to just say she's Asian with almond eyes. What you might want to do is you might want to go to Google and say Sri Lankan beauty contestants. And then open another tab and say Sri Lankan women. And then open another tab and then say famous Sri Lankan actresses. And then open another tab and type in Sri Lankan influencers. Get different Sri Lankan farmers. Get different kinds of images. That's one of the amazing things about Google is we have access to more information now than anyone ever did before. So you don't have to go hop into a Sri Lankan girl's inbox and say, I demand you teach me about the Sri Lankan ethnicity and how they look. You can do this research on your own. Get a few keywords going, look into Google, and then put everything together on a Pinterest board, print the images out if you're old school. And if you're really, really old school, just look at the images and come up with descriptions on the fly of skin tones that you've noticed, different undertones, etc., etc. So this is where I'm getting to the old school. Everyone who's a writer of color who has looked into those has definitely found writingwithcolor.tumblr.com. And I was just going to put the link in the description, but I want y'all to know where this info came from because the good sis or sir or they, them, I don't know, has been doing the work, okay? And this is an example of a little chart that they made to talk about different undertones. And there are people with warm undertones and there are people with cool undertones. Now, to me, Rutina Wesley actually has more warm undertones. I don't know if I have like really poor ability to perceive color sometimes, I think, but this is an example. You can talk about jeweled undertones, rose, magenta, sapphire. Someone can be dark skinned with sapphire undertones. Do you see how much more rich that is than black? And you might say, okay, well, that's doing too much. And it's like, but you don't think it's doing too much when you talk about how someone has moonlight skin or skin like a pale beach sand. You don't think that way. It's because you're taught to think that Black people are Black and Asian people are Asian, and you don't think to describe their skin tones with a lot of depth. That is an implicit bias. So I want you to break that implicit bias. Don't do too much. I'm not saying use 17 adjectives in a row because of white guilt, but think about being a little richer in your descriptions and applying equal levels of richness to characters of color that you do to white characters. And yes, Nicole Richie, I don't know if she's a character of color, but she's a person of color. Sorry, she's a real person. But you can see her that she perfectly exemplifies warm skin tones. And notice as well that doing this allows you to expand your mind in how you think about skin tone. It's not just black or white. There's undertones, and these are really good examples from that link where you can find these. Okay, so now I'm going to dive into, these are not all the people of color in the world, but we're going to talk about variety and why this is wrong. So here I have two Indian people. The guy on the right is an actor. I don't know who he is. I'm going to be honest. I asked my sister, who's a Bollywood fan, for famous Bollywood actors, and I picked an Indian actress from the show Never Have I Ever, which I just watched. I'm going to show you, using an HTML color picker, that these two people are both Indian and have completely different undertones that you should describe in different ways. They are not the same. So saying Indian doesn't capture the richness and the diversity of the Indian people. I'm almost certain that over 1 billion people live in India. They do not all look the same. They do not have the same skin tone. They do not have the same eye color. They don't have the same facial structure. They don't have the same bodies. And if you think that they do, that is a bias. That is a prejudice. And that is honestly like low-key bigoted. So I'm going to show you the HTML color picker, and then we're going to go back to the presentation. Here are 3 examples of famous Black women. Again, I'm going to show you on the HTML color picker that these 3 women, you can't just say Black, because Black is Tracy Ellis Ross, Black is Ajak Dang, Black is Nicole Bahari, and these 3 women do not have the same skin tone. So when you're just saying Black, that means nothing, because there is variety and diversity in Blackness, in it being Indian, and in the other ethnicities I'm going to discuss. These 3 random people I selected for no other reason than they were Asian, making this made me feel very strange because I just don't think like this. These people do not have the same skin tone. These people do not have the same eye shape. These people's eyes are not all almond shaped. On the left, we have a blogger, in the middle, a model, and on the right, Godfrey Gao. And they do not have the same ethnic background, hair color, okay, eye color, skin color, or face shape. So they're not just Asian. And then we have Hispanic. Now, there's a difference between Hispanic and Latina. And all of the women I've selected here are Latina because Hispanic people are from Spain. And you can go look at Antonio Banderas, Penelope Cruz, Charlie Sheen for a variety of Spaniards. And these are people from different Latin American countries. As you can see, not everyone Latina looks like Michelle Rodriguez or Sofia Vergara. They don't all look the same. On the left, we have Yaya da Costa, and she has very dark jewel tone skin and an afro. We also have another Afro-Latina, Gina Torres, on the far right. And then in the middle, I have Stephanie Beatriz and Sofia Vergara, who are 2 Latina actresses. And again, they all have very different skin tones. So when you're saying Hispanic, that doesn't describe a skin tone. And that specific ethnicity doesn't describe any of these skin tones in actuality. And you can learn how to do better by doing your research and figuring this out. And again, we're going to go to the color picker and I'm going to show you that we're going to pick colors from the skins. I'm going to show you that these are not all the same complexion up close. So now that we've done that, we're going to go back to, okay, what descriptions do you use? And I'm going to be honest with you, this resource is where I get most of my descriptions, and it's writingwithcolor.tumblr.com. And I put the link up big and bold, and it's going to be linked in the description because it's so important not to just steal people's work and to give credit where it's due. So I'm citing my sources. And these are some examples of colors you can use, and there's so much more on the website. Russet, ochre, sepia, umber, terracotta, fawn. Now, some colors won't work. Personally, I wouldn't say that someone had khaki skin. I wouldn't say that somebody had gold skin a lot of the time. However, these are examples to train your mind to think outside the box for describing characters of color. And I often use russet with copper undertones for a lot of my brown skinned characters. And I use umber a lot of times for very dark skinned characters. As well. And the key is to practice. Don't overdo it. I don't want to see, well, I will never see probably, but don't go into a book and say she was terracotta, she was russet, she was ochre, she was copper. Pick a couple, but don't use the same ones over and over. Don't use coffee and chocolate. And on that note, when it comes to those food descriptions, you can use them sparingly. I won't say don't use them at all. However, if you're just starting to practice describing skin tones in a diverse way that doesn't reflect those cliches, stay away from these cliches because you're leaning on them as a crutch. And so in order to do differently, you need to move away from your crutch and, expand and explore different options. So again, these are other colors that I really like to use from that same source: mahogany, walnut, chestnut. I rarely use oak, but you could if you want to, and ash. Ash kind of can have negative connotations for a lot of Black people, myself included. So I wouldn't say someone's skin was ashy, but it might apply. So some additional writing tips to close off this video. All right, so most times you don't need to overdo it with your descriptions anyways. So how many times do we need to read the phrase emerald eyes? I don't know, but we're still reading about emerald eyes in every piece of fiction known to man. So again, don't overdo it, but you should make a concerted effort to describe characters of color better because you probably could use improvement. Then the next tip is to create a vocabulary list that you can rely on and reference. The easiest thing to do is keep those references handy so that instead of leaning on coffee and chocolate to describe people's skin or caramel mocha, you can rely on this new list with a more diverse set of adjectives and comparisons. Then vary your descriptions for characters. Not every Black character is going to be sepia. Some may be tawny, some may be russet, some may be ochre, some may be dark with golden undertones. You can vary your descriptions for different characters, so not every single character is just the token. And then finally, create characters, because a lot of the reasons that people do this is because they want you to use the stereotypes that you project to onto the skin tone description to describe someone's entire personality. So the character becomes, oh, he was the Black guy. Oh, she was the Asian girl. She was the Latina. She's not the guitar player. She's not the high-powered business executive. She's not the fun one in the group. She's, people are relying on stereotypes to convey information because they haven't done the work of creating characters. So this is why I say don't write characters for the wrong reasons, because you need to add diversity into your books because you're creating characters, not because you feel like, well, they're going to drag me, so I guess I'll just throw in a Black guy, because that is really, just don't bother if you're going to be quite that lazy. So in conclusion, put in some effort. check your implicit biases, and do a lot of practice to become a better writer overall, because this will seriously improve your work and improve the way that everyone resonates with your work, because your writing will be better. And that is it for the video. So if you liked this video, don't forget to smash that thumbs up button. And I would also like you to subscribe to the channel for more free writing resources. If I really want to know if I should keep creating more videos like this. So please don't forget to leave me a comment and let me know what you thought about the video, and hit the notification bell so you can get notified about when I post new updates to the channel. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!